Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. Hello, this is Karen Wonder, and thanks for tuning into the Hanging On to Hope podcast. Today we are interviewing Scot McKnight and Laura Barringer, authors of the book A Church Called Tov. Scot is a professor of New Testament at Northern Seminary, and Laura is a teacher of first and second grade students. Their book is about forming a goodness culture that resists abuse of power and promotes healing. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
Thank you for having us. It's good to be with you.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. So your book was great for laying the foundation for what makes a healthy church. I will quote from your book a lot on this podcast. In the introduction, you say, above all, this is a book of hope about a better way, a way we're calling the circle of Tov, from the Hebrew word for good, and what it takes to form a culture of goodness in our churches that will resist abuse of power, promote healing, and eradicate the toxic fallout that infects so many Christian organizations. I love that we're talking about this and have you both on because I feel like we have said a lot on our podcast about what's in need of change in our churches, but not enough about the hope that there is a better way, that there are good churches out there too. And we're all about hope on this podcast, obviously.
Continuing with part 2 of A Church Called Tov.
That was great.
Yeah, I love that.
That was great.
That's what I love about our podcast because that's something as you were sharing that, I'm like, I need to hear that over and over. So
I'd like to hear it again too, because I kind of liked what I said. I hadn't said that.
You're going to get to listen to it as much as you want when it comes out.
Yeah, you can listen to it over and over. Like to me, that kind of truth is just something I do. I want to hear it over and over. And that was so well said. So you say the heart of Jesus' mission is the wounded, the neglected, the abused, and the violated. One word you say that describes Jesus to the core is empathy. Empathy is the ability to see the world through others' pain. You stress that sadly, many churches today lack empathy and compassion. A Tov church means that they hear the cries of the distressed and the wounded respond with compassion. A Tov church will do everything it can to not re-wound the wounded. And we were both wounded and then we got re-wounded by the church. So that's really powerful. That is why this podcast is so needed, is I've heard so many stories of re-wounding of the wounded that I love how clear you make that in your book, to contrast to what is not Tov. So anything more you want to add to that?
Well, we saw this, and I'm not trying to pick on Willow Creek here, but this is my experience, and this is why I speak and why we speak what we do. Where the inspiration for the book came from is that we were seeing such a lack of empathy in the responses from the church. And it was all about protecting the institution, guarding the reputation at the expense of really damaging people. And I didn't have the language for it at the time. I just knew that it wasn't right. And I knew I'm not a theologian, I'm not a professor, but I've read the Bible enough to know that this is not what...
It's not jiving here.
No, it didn't feel right. And, that's when I would call my dad and he would explain, it's not right.
Yeah. Empathy is an outgrowth of experiencing the empathy of God, the compassion of God. And empathy does have the capacity to enter into other people's experience. It is said of Jesus, I think it's 6 or 8 times in the first 3 Gospels, that he had compassion. And it's a very interesting Greek word that is used here. And it's virtually a straightforward translation of a Hebrew word that means, you could translate it, guts. His inward organs were moved. And it describes visceral reaction and response, visceral mercy when someone sees someone in pain.
Right.
And Jesus didn't look at someone in pain and go, oh, I feel pain. You saw on his face, in the tears in his eyes, and in the embodied experience of caring for another person, what empathy and compassion are all about. And that's why it's the gospel writers who say Jesus was moved with compassion, or he commiserated with someone. It's never Jesus saying, oh, I feel compassion. It's Jesus being described as having compassion. And this is the description of people who saw him, who watched him. When he came into a community, he saw the people who were in pain. In a sense, he didn't seek them out. He saw them where they were. So it's not surprising that Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, of someone who was wounded on the path. And some religious leaders walk by because they're following the law that you're not to let your shadow be cast on a dead body because it makes you unclean, or touch a dead body. But Jesus instead says, no, you're not reading the Bible right if you can excuse yourself from showing compassion to someone who's wounded on the path. That right there is the heart of empathy in Jesus. He sees the wounded and he responds to the wounded. And he calls us to be responders to the wounded. Churches that don't respond with compassion to the wounded are failing in their calling to be churches.
Yes. What I find interesting is I'm one of the wounded, and I feel that it's increased my empathy and compassion for those that are wounded.
Yeah.
And it's making it more real. There's on my end, there's going to be no rewounding because I still have that deep sense of pain from my own wounds that help me reach out to those that need my help. And this is my life now. So,
Brenda, that's our experience, is the people who've been wounded are the ones who see the wounded.
Right. Exactly. And you wish that everybody had that type of compassion, though, in this world, but they don't.
Yeah.
Gardner Taylor was a famous African-American preacher in New York City. And the first lesson that people learned about his amazing pastoral ministry and preaching was that he preached from pain. I mean, his church burned down. He had 2 wives who died. He just experienced, he was a black man. He experienced one injustice after another. And he said, it is pain that makes us authentic pastors and leaders in the church.
And I feel the pain, so I completely can relate to that.
Bless you.
You talk about the importance of trusting relationships and say that an unhealthy church has untrusting relationships, which breaks down into cliques, tribes, and interest groups. You say trusting relationships are built on reciprocation. We must give in order to get a mutual exchange. Power-based church cultures are one-way streets. The flow of trust is toward the pastor, the leaders, the powerful. But in a grace-based church, reciprocation flows freely, as do the gifts. Do you want to expound on that?
Yeah. Grace is like this, is that grace is a gift. When someone is given a gift, they have an immediate, urgent desire to give back. That's reciprocation. One of the first century Roman thinkers said that gift giving is like playing catch with a ball, is that if I toss it to you, you want to toss it back to me. And then we form a game of relationship with one another where we give back and forth. That's what trust is all about. It's reciprocation. We give, we trust someone, then they trust us. Then we trust them again, and they trust us. And it forms a deep trust. Nothing is more debilitating to church, to marriage, to relationships than broken trusts.
Right. I agree with that.
That's what destroys confidence in relationship with another person. And so trust is I don't know if it's fragile, but it is a tender relationship that needs to be nurtured in order for it to become all that God designed it to be.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
That's really good. And you kind of already touched on this, but even though you already touched on this, I'm going to still share it because it's so good. It's so good. And when you talked about the gospel writers and that Jesus was filled with compassion, and you say in the book that there's three options, the way that they knew that Jesus was filled with compassion, because that's said quite throughout the Bible about Jesus, and Jesus filled with compassion. And you said either he told them, his face showed it, or his tears flowed. And you say that it's second and third are most likely, that Jesus did not just feel bad, that he acted. Each time the gospel writers describe the compassion of Jesus, they also tell us what he did. He didn't just, like you were saying, he didn't just, I feel bad for you. He didn't just say it, he acted. He healed, he cured, he cleansed, he taught, he pastored. He validated their pain. And that's what I was in a spiritually abusive relationship, and God validated me all throughout that. Even when well-meaning church people would say things to me, God validated my pain. That was so real. I just had this, to me, it was like a supernatural experience that I can't even explain. I just felt that God validated me, came to me and validated me. And that was such a special moment. And one of my all-time favorite stories from the Bible is the woman at the well and the compassion and utter love that he showed for her. He treated her as an image bearer, which you say is critical for a Tov church. So I don't know if there's anything more you'd already add to that. I know you kind of already talked about it, but anything more you'd want to add?
Well, this is just so characteristic of Jesus. I think when you look at the Samaritan woman and you are the disciples who've gone away and come back and go, what's he doing? I think when they sat back and thought about it, they thought, that's just Jesus. Every time we go somewhere, he does something like this. Well, it's all the time. He is finding the people that nobody else sees,
right,
welcoming the people that nobody wants at the table, and conversing with people that nobody talked to.
Right.
This is the way he was. And he sets for us an example of
He does.
Developing eyes to see, hearts to feel, the people who are untouchable, unseen, or invisible, and for whom people have no compassion. That's what Jesus is calling us to do, because if you read the Gospels, that's Jesus over
It is.
and
Absolutely.
over and over.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this, Matthew chapters 8 and 9. If you read those passages, you'll see you almost get a laundry list of the people who were not accepted in Jewish society because of uncleanness rules, etc., whom Jesus seems to have found and said, these are going to be the people we minister to. These are the lost sheep of the house of Israel. These are the wounded and the flayed and the bruised and broken. These are the ones we're going to minister to.
Yeah, and he went out of his way to meet their pain, validate them.
Now, you talk about the importance of truth, that we can only by the power of the Holy Spirit that we can learn the truth and do truth. Life and speech, living a true life and telling the truth are vitally connected, you say. Victims of abuse muster a lot of courage to speak truth and to be vulnerable. You share, as difficult as it might be to revisit the pain of abuse, people who have been wounded want their stories to be told. They want their pain acknowledged and the truth to be known. Can you share why this is a necessary component of healing?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not a psychologist, but in our experience with the survivors that we've had the privilege of sitting down with, is primarily what I've learned is they want to be believed. They've been mistreated. They've been gaslit. People are angry at them for taking down the church or trying to ruin the reputation of the pastor. And it was with all of them that I've spoken with, it was of prime importance that the truth was told, and what had been said about them that was false was corrected. And it was so important for healing. I don't really see how healing can happen without the truth being told.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And part of it is the unwillingness of churches to tell the truth. This is what happens, Brenda and Karen. This is what happens every time at church. Not every time. Let's say 98%. When there's an allegation against a leader, a pastor, someone in the church who has significance and power, that the church turns the allegation into a legal prosecution, and they become defense attorneys. Rather than investigating to find the truth so that the truth can be known and we can live into the truth, whether it means confession, repentance, etc., or something else. The churches get into defense of themselves and their own reputation, and they go silent with the accusers, the victims, the survivors, just get ignored. And all of a sudden, it's an inside game of propping up the reputation of the church and the leader rather than exposing the church to the pure light of truth. So churches have to become truth-telling institutions in order to live into true healing and true gospeling in our world today. They have to become agents of truth. They follow someone who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And you could translate this, I am the true and living way. I am the true way to life. All those things are possibilities. Those words can all be combined. That's what Jesus was telling people, that he was the truth. He lived in the truth. He told the truth. Churches are to be witnesses of the true Jesus, the truth, and to live into that truth themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And when a church is not doing that, then they're not following after, their true calling as a church, if they're representing,
That's right.
Jesus Christ.
Good.
That was actually the first chapter of the book that we wrote, was the false narratives chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my podcast, I Tell the Truth. It's the first one. But I had so much proof and everything to back up everything I had to say first. So I felt comfortable with that. But it's still a little scary because you want to feel safe as well. So it is, you want everybody to know the truth, but at the same time, it is a little bit scary as well. But it is definitely healing to tell the truth.
It also makes you very vulnerable, didn't it, Brenda?
It did.
To venture out there with that story, because then
months.
people could come. Laura and I and Chris, my wife, are working right now with some women who have become vulnerable in telling the truth of exposing some sexual abuse, some rape, some really sad stuff. And it is it's unsafe to go forward with a true story that is an allegation against someone with power, especially religious power, because people think they stand there for God and they've got to be doing what's right. So this person has got to be lying.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. We see you as a wounded resistor, Brenda. And it takes a lot of courage to be a person who steps forward to tell the truth. So we applaud that.
Thank you. It was very, very hard.
Yeah.
We hold you in high regard.
Yep.
Yes, I do too. So our last questions, you write how Eugene Peterson, who's a well-known translator of the Message and other books, was concerned that pastors were becoming leaders, entrepreneurs, and managers rather than preserving their calling as spiritual directors of the faith community. He defined 3 most important pastoral acts as praying, reading scripture, and giving spiritual direction. You say you've never heard a pastor who focuses on the pastor as leader say anything like this, ever. You also say Jesus never talked to his people about becoming leaders, which is what the modern church does today. And I know when we talked to Diane Landberg, we asked her about, what are some signs of a healthy church? She's the one that recommended your book, by the way. But she was saying how, a church that doesn't, that's not like its leader is a church that's not, obviously following after that. So why do you think, and that's run like businesses, a lot of churches are run like businesses today, which is, definitely what I can feel sometimes when I'm going to a really big church. Not that they're all like that, but why do you think so many churches are so focused on leadership development today and having that focus?
Well, I don't know exactly why, but it started when in the 1980s, I began to watch this suddenly a business-derived sense of leadership creeping into the church. But let me say it this way. When a mom and dad see themselves as a friend to a child, their relationship is distorted, and their calling as moms and dads is distorted. When a pastor sees himself or herself as a leader rather than a shepherd, as Eugene Peterson was really big on seeing, then their relationship to the people is distorted. When you see yourself as a leader, you see everybody else as followers. That is dangerous because suddenly you're not one of them, you're above them. When you're a pastor, you're calling people to follow Jesus along with you. When you're a leader, you're calling people to follow yourself. I am really nervous. I don't think I've tried this. I've been trying this for 20 years. I've tried to avoid using the word leader. It's almost impossible. But I make it very clear all the time that the primary term for leaders in churches should be pastors, because when we think of ourselves in pastoral categories, we think of ourselves as nurturing Christ-likeness in other people as we try to become Christ-like. And that is a dynamic image that we need to recover in churches today. We have far too many obsessed with leadership and not enough obsessed with followership. I'll put it that way.
Oh, that's fantastic. I never thought of it that way.
Dad, I love when you talk about how many times Jesus and Paul talked about leadership.
Almost never. Jesus doesn't use this term. And he basically blasts away at the disciples in Matthew 23. You don't have any, I'm your teacher, I'm your master, etc. You don't have, you're all brothers and sisters. Give it up. And when they wanted to be dominating leaders, Jesus said, you're called to be like me. I didn't come to be served. I came to serve and give my life a ransom for many. The Apostle Paul only uses the word leader rarely, and it basically means to stand up front, to stand before people. Paul's categories, fundamental categories, were categories drawn from wisdom. They were elders, of servants, deacons, and of stewards of finances, bishop. So he doesn't use those term leader. There is a good word for that, and that's not where Paul goes. It's not where the New Testament goes, because Jesus was the one and only leader. Everybody else was a follower, and we learn to nurture one another in following Jesus.
Yeah, and he washed people, he washed their feet, like he showed that.
Yeah, there you go. That ends the whole thing, doesn't it?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, because I spend most of my time just using Jesus as example and trying to be like that. But then everybody talks about being a leader, and I always feel uncomfortable with that. And now it all makes sense why. Because it's
Good
when
for
you're
you.
loving and doing the things Jesus did, it's not about being the leader.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. What you said, it's just
I know, you're right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
Well, thank you for being on our podcast. We just wanted to know where we could find your book and other resources and where you're at on social media.
Go ahead, Laura.
Well,
I know you're on Twitter because I follow you both on Twitter.
Yes, we're both very active on Twitter, and check out our website. It's churchcalledtov.org, and it has a number of resources and a place where you can connect with us too.
And I have a newsletter called Tov Unleashed. It's with Substack, and I have a website, a blog at Christianity Today called Jesus Creed.
Awesome.
Okay, and the best place to buy their book is on your website? Or
Probably Amazon. You can.
Okay.
There's a link on our website for it, but
Great.
it links to Amazon. So,
And when's the new book coming out? Any date for that yet?
well,
Well, it hasn't been written yet. So
It's in progress.
No date on that.
I would say 2023.
Okay.
So in the
That's good.
spring. Let's hope the spring of 2023.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed your book. So thank you so much for being on the show. Whenever I get a response that, oh yeah, they're going to be on, I get all excited. So it's so great to have you get both on.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was
thank you for
inviting
having
both.
us.
No
Yes.
problem. You say trusting relationships are built on reciprocation.
Reciprocation.
Let's just say, okay, you say trusting relationships are built on reciprocation. How about that?
There you
Yeah.
go.
Reciprocity fall.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go for it, Laura. Oh, you want me to?
Thank
Okay.
goodness I edit everything
Oh.
myself.
The grace.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.